In this video, I am going to be ranking every single cut Pokemon that was just recently leaked from worst to best in my own opinion. And we're gonna go ahead and get right into it, but there's a couple ground rules I've gotta share first. The first is that this leak is going to be covering cut Pokemon from the leak that just recently happened as of the making of this video, aka the Teraleak. Second is that I'm only going to be covering Pokemon that were completely cut from the games entirely. So I'm not going to be covering beta designs of Pokemon that did actually make the games. This is only going to be concerning Pokemon that were just completely removed from the games altogether. And then finally, I just wanted to put out as a disclaimer that due to all of the stuff from the leak kind of just getting dumped on us all at once, I have done my very best to compile all of the cut Pokemon together for this video. However, I'm also a human being, so I could have potentially missed something, but I'm pretty sure I haven't, but I just wanted to put a disclaimer there just in case. I've also got a super quick update to squeeze in here too, because as I just referred to, I did in fact forget a couple Pokemon, and also, one other cut Pokemon was leaked while making this video that I needed to squeeze in. There were actually more than just that were leaked, but most of them we don't have designs or images for, just text and stuff like that, so I won't be able to properly rank those ones just yet, but there is a few extras that I am going to include in this video, and with that said, I think we've got all our bases covered, so let's go. With that said though, let's go ahead and get right into it, and of course we are going to be beginning at the bottom of the list and with the worst of the worst. And my worst of the cut Pokemon is this guy. Honestly, I don't even really know what's going on here. He's obviously a tree stump, but I don't really know what the deal is. Like, why does he have a clown nose? Where is his face? I just don't understand what is happening with this guy, so that's why he's at the bottom. Next up is this boxing gorilla guy, and by the way, these guys do have Japanese names, or at least a lot of them do, but I haven't exactly committed those to memory yet, so I'm just going to be referring to them by my own personal colloquial names. And this guy, aka Boxing Gorilla, is just a boxing gorilla. He doesn't really feel like a Pokemon to me. Obviously, as Pokemon designs go, it's kind of pretty on the more basic side of things. So yeah, definitely on the lower end of the list for me. That same general idea is why I've also got this mermaid Pokemon up next. It's cool in terms of the concept of having a mermaid Pokemon, but also it's kind of just a mermaid at the same time, so it doesn't really get a whole lot of points for creativity. Next up is this smiley guy, and I will give this guy some points for originality because he's certainly a character, but he doesn't really feel like a Pokemon to me. He kind of just looks sort of creepy and just doesn't really have that Pokemon charm. At number 71, we have this noise monkey looking Pokemon, and again, it's the same sort of sentiment that we've been having to this point. This guy is kinda just a noise monkey. There's not really a whole lot of other stuff going on, so there's not really that much creativity, so I can't really rank it all that high. And the same is also true for this Christmas tree Pokemon, or I guess this pine tree Pokemon that's covered with snow. But the interesting thing about this guy is that potentially this could be where Snover and Abomasnow from Generation 4 eventually came from, because obviously there's a very similar sort of concept going on. So that is kind of interesting, but otherwise this guy is very much a beta design, if you know what I mean. And then going along with the Christmas tree is this beloved Foot Yeti, and this guy has been kind of endearing to everyone since he was first leaked, but he's kind of weird with a foot on his mouth, and also again, I'm not really getting too much of the Pokemon vibes here, so I could only rank him so high. And beating out this Foot Yeti is this Peacock Pokemon. It would be really, really awesome to have a true traditional Peacock Pokemon, and I say traditional because Quaquaval kind of is, but it's also sort of not just, it's not like a full-on Peacock Pokemon, so having a full-on Peacock Pokemon would be really cool. So I like that this guy is here, but also it's just straight up a Peacock, so again, not a whole lot of creativity. Next up is what I am calling the present turtle because it's a turtle that seems like it has some kind of package or present on its back. And this gets a little bit of points for creativity because, I mean, the concept of a present turtle is something, but it's pretty straightforward with that concept. The design isn't really refined as you might expect with it being a beta Pokemon, so yeah, it gets a lower ranking. And following up present turtle, we have what I like to call just a dog, because basically this is just a dog, and that's why it's on this part of the list. However, it's kind of interesting that its back has what looks to be kind of like a saddle or something like that, so I'm kind of wondering if this dog was meant to be ridden somehow. Following that up, we have this polar bear Pokemon who could have been the precursor to Beartic and its pre-evolution Cubchoo, but as of right now, it's just a polar bear. So again, these less creative ones are just getting the short end of the stick here in terms of my rankings. I certainly appreciate creativity, and we kind of sort of have that in a way with this next one, which I like to call the Sableye looking guy. This evidently comes from Generation 4, and so it's not Sableye, it's not a beta Sableye, but it's hard to say what it is at the same time. There's really not a whole lot of information on it, and obviously, as you can see, it kind of looks like Sableye, so points for being kind of a original looking character, but then it also looks too close to another Pokemon at the same time. Next up, we have this fish flower, and apparently there is some speculation that this could potentially be tied to Lileep and Cradily, because the body style, body shape is the same general type of thing, I guess, which could be cool, but otherwise, just on its own, this design is okay, but it's nothing that wows me too much. Following that up, we have this squid Pokemon, and again, it's just a squid, it's not too creative, that's why it's here, and it's also kind of sad because in previous leaks that we've seen for Gen 1 and Gen 2, there were also squid Pokemon that existed that got cut from those games as well, so a squid Pokemon got cut and lost its chance to be in a Pokemon game 3 generations in a row, which is pretty sad. And on the same kind of note, we have this shrimp Pokemon next. And this guy looks kind of neat. He just isn't really as cool as some of the others on this list, so that's why he's kind of lower. And now we have what I am referring to as the Bubblehead Floaty guy, because I really don't know what this is supposed to be. So it kind of gets points for originality and being unique. I do like that, but again, it's just not really wowing me personally. We also have this Lady Bee Pokemon, which is pretty interesting. It has an interesting kind of look to it. Also makes you wonder if this could have been where Vespiquen started, although it is a little bit different of a design, a little more aggressive looking, I would say, but still pretty neat nevertheless. We also have this Pokemon, who apparently, according to various data, I guess, that's been recovered from this leak, is what eventually became Baltoy in the final games, or at the very least, Baltoy replaced this Pokemon within the game itself, I guess. But personally, I think this design actually looks a lot like Marini, so I would be super interested to see if there's any actual connection there, or I would love to learn that at some point in time, whether that's the case, but yeah, pretty interesting. Next up is this guy, and this guy looks pretty cool and interesting and all that good stuff, and evidently was the original, one half of the original idea for the whole Zangoose-Viper rivalry, so that's really cool. We'll get to the other half of that in a second, but otherwise, this is a pretty rough design, so I can only rank it so high. Next up, we have this Pokemon, who is a sort of egg baby looking Pokemon. Some people have likened it to Happiny. I don't know whether or not it actually does have a connection to Happiny. I don't think that's confirmed in any way. But with that said, it's a pretty solid, okay, just kind of middle of the road solid design in my opinion. And following that up, we have this puppy Pokemon, and it definitely gets points for being cute. It definitely looks a bit original, I would say, as dog Pokemon go, but it also doesn't have anything that just flies off the page either. This floating flower, meanwhile, does have a little bit that flies off the page, because it kinda flies off the page itself, because it's floating. Yeah, those are the kinds of jokes I provide when I do live commentary. But again, it's got a little creativity to it. That's kind of where this list is going. The more creative you are and original, the higher I tend to rank you. But it's not like it's anything monumentally original. It's just a flower with a face that also floats, so yeah, it's not really anything crazy. Meanwhile, however, this ice bug looking Pokemon looks pretty cool. It's got a little bit of originalness to it. This actually looks like a design that with a little bit of polish could have actually been in the games. I think it's got an excellent start to it and doesn't look as rough or as unoriginal as some of these others, but there's also other Pokemon from this leak that I just prefer way more. Same thing goes with this fly Pokemon, or at least I think it's supposed to be a fly. It's got like a good start going for it. It's got like the makings of what could have been a good Pokemon, but there's just, obviously, it didn't really get polished enough to truly make it to that next step, and also there's just other Pokemon on here that I think are cooler. This next one, though, is particularly unique, and it's what I think is supposed to be a hummingbird combined with a book, which is a really interesting concept. I would love to know what they were thinking when they went for that sort of direction. It creates a really unique and original looking Pokemon. I think the fact that its wings are a literal book, essentially, could have been refined a little more, but it would have been awesome to see that actually get refined, because I think this one has potential. It just, again, looks a little too beta-y for me to really rank it very high. Next, we have our first evolution line of the video with these two guys, what I'm referring to as some kind of horn or musical instrument or something like that. They are a two-stage line, and they look pretty unique and interesting. I don't really have anything bad to say. They would have been interesting as like object, sort of sentient machine type Pokemon like Magnemite or Klinklang or something like that. I think they could have been a solid Pokemon along those lines, but I can also see why they were cut. We also have these two Pokemon next, which are musical frogs, with this one evolving into this one, which is really cool, and it might actually sound familiar to you, because this is essentially what became Timple and its whole line from Generation 5, because Timple is a musical tadpole which eventually becomes a frog, and it's not quite as musical in its evolutions with Palpitoad and Seismitoad, but that is kind of the direction that that line takes, which seems like it possibly began right here and likely began right here, which is pretty cool. Next, we have this interesting Oni kind of Pokemon, which seems to also be the evolution of this little guy right here, which is basically just a little shrub monster, or at least that's what I'm referring to it as. And these guys are cool, they're interesting, they're unique. They don't feel as much like Pokemon as I would personally prefer, but they do have interesting and unique designs, and this is kind of where we're starting to get into that Pokemon feeling territory, where these feel like actual Pokemon, so it does a solid job of that. And along those same sort of lines, we have these two, which is a red spider lily flower Pokemon and its pre-evolution. There are some interesting things that I want to talk about with these Pokemon in a future video, so they've got some interesting traits going for them. As far as their designs, once again, it's got that Pokemon feel. It just feels like it was abandoned as a design before it could get polished to the point where it could be really good. But I feel like if it was, it could have been something cool, so it gets a solid ranking from me. Next up, we have this Hippo Pokemon, and I don't know whether or not this inspired Hippopotas in Generation 4, because this comes from Generation 3, because it's also, even though it's a Hippo Pokemon, a pretty different design, but it does have some unique and interesting qualities to it, so it's not just a Hippo, so overall, fairly intriguing. We also have this red rabbit Pokemon, which seems to be a carryover from one of the cut Pokemon of Generation 2, because they look pretty similar. So this guy might have got cut twice, which is unfortunate, because he has a pretty solid design. Again, it looks like the kind of Pokemon that with a little bit of polish and care could have been one of those really endearing, cutesy Pokemon, like like Munchlax comes to mind, or Marill, or something like that could have been a pretty popular Pokemon. So it's unfortunate that this little guy bit the dust. Next up, we have a Fire Snake, and this guy is pretty basic because he's pretty much just a fire snake as far as we can tell. But that concept is pretty cool, so I can't rank it too low, but I also can't rank it too high either. But overall, a solid beta Pokemon. There's also this Pokemon, which I guess is based on some kind of rattler or noisemaker. It seems to be like a sound or music-based or instrument-based Pokemon, which is pretty interesting. It has a unique and kind of colorful design to it, but again, we're in that range of Pokemon that look like Pokemon, they feel like Pokemon, but they seem like they were abandoned at their beta stage, so they feel kind of beta-y. That's kind of where we're at with this current batch, and that applies to this Pokemon too, in my opinion. Following that up, though, we come to this orange bird-looking Pokemon, and this guy is pretty cute and endearing, I will say that. I think, again, it could have been refined into something that could have been really cool. I think there's a solid concept here, so it gets a solid ranking. There's also this sea dinosaur, which looks like the perfect combination of cool, but also really tender-hearted and nice and lovable, which is like the Pokemon combination. Like cute and adorable combined with cool and fierce and tough. So again, with a little bit of extra polish, this guy could have been awesome. Okay, and now my first little post-production addition that I forgot about initially are these weird concept art designs from Gen 3. And honestly, I forgot about them at first because they don't even really feel like Pokemon at all. They're clearly just about getting ideas onto the page, and we can even see that one of these became Cacturne, so that's cool. But yeah, they're interesting, but in this form, in my opinion, I can't really rank them very high because of how un-Pokemon they feel, if that makes sense. My favorites, though, would have to be the rocky dog, cat-looking things, followed by this pretty infamous at this point, crazy energy dog, and then in third place I would put this golem with all the unknown on it, because that obviously could have some really cool implications if a Pokemon like that ever did actually surface. But yeah, anyways, that's that, and now back to the original countdown. Now we're starting to get into things that really feel like they've got that Pokemon flair to them, and that begins with this guy, which I am lovingly referring to as the Magnet Crab Pokemon, because he looks kind of like a Krabby just with magnets for pincers, and that's a really cool, interesting idea. It would have been really interesting to see where they would have taken this, and I genuinely would have been up for having this as an actual Pokemon, given that it actually got that development. Next up is this Pokemon, which looks kind of like some sort of spiky mouse or rodent of some kind, and this is just totally my personal opinion and speculation. I don't know if this is the case remotely at all, but this reminds me a lot of Togedemaru from Gen 7. It has that same kind of face, that same kind of feel in my opinion, and then it has that same kind of theme of being spiky. So I don't know if there's any relation there at all, but I just got that kind of vibe from this mon, and it reminded me a lot of Togedemaru, so it would be interesting to see if there's actually a story there. Okay, so now we're starting to get into some of the big guns of this list, but still at the bottom of that kind of tier to start things off is Mega Jinx. Now, on the one hand, it's really, really cool that Jinx was going to get a Mega Evolution, and now we have evidence of it in an actual beta design as well. All of that is really cool, and it sucks that Jinx didn't get that love that it definitely should have and still should get at some point, but being a cut Mega Evolution of Jinx is basically all this has going for it. I know this is a beta design, but it's nothing really that special, and it's also just Jinx at the same time. It's not like it's like Mewtwo or some other really cool Pokemon like that. Like, it's just Jinx, so it gets some street cred for sure. It's super fascinating to learn about, but I'm kinda not too miffed either that it was cut. Following that up, though, we have this design, which actually apparently is an early version of Altaria, which is really cool, but I'm still including it on this list because it's obviously basically a whole different Pokemon at this point, and I don't even think it evolved from Swablu. I could be wrong there, but I don't think at this point it did. It's basically just a whole different Pokemon, and as basically a whole different Pokemon, it looks really cool and interesting. Another one of these Pokemon I find really cool and interesting is this one-eared rabbit-ish looking Pokemon, and I think this is really cool. The concept of a Pokemon that has one ear that maybe should have two, it looks cool. It, once again, has more of that true Pokemon type of feel, so I genuinely like this one, and it would have been cool to see it actually get a little more final polish and make the final games. Next up, we have this skunk Pokemon as well as its evolution, and this is kind of a different take on what you expect a skunk to be, like Skunky and Stuntank, because it's a nice looking skunk. It's a happy, friendly looking skunk, which I personally find quite endearing and even a little cute, which I never thought I would say for a skunk Pokemon, so I guess I gotta give it some credit where credit is due. It's a pretty solid design. Now we're getting into really unique and interesting and like cool design territory with this guy. This is what I believe is supposed to be known as the foster Pokemon, because there were some dex entries for this Pokemon that were uncovered a little while back before we had this Pokemon's design that talked about it basically fostering young Pokemon that were abandoned or something to that effect. And I think that's an interesting, it's obviously like a Kangaskhan type thing, and this particular approach to that design and how this guy looks is really interesting and unique. Like, it has, again, sort of an original look, a creative look. Like, if this actually was in the games, it would be a solid design. So I think this one's pretty cool. Next up, we have something from Gen 5, and that is this trio of snail Pokemon. And I never thought I would say that a snail Pokemon looks really cool, and I also said that with Goodra, who I absolutely love, but yeah, these snail Pokemon look really awesome, so I guess Game Freak knows how to do snail Pokemon. The other really cool thing about these guys is that these were originally going to exist before the whole Shelmet, Carablast, and Escavalier, Acelgor dynamic was introduced. This was what they were going to do before that whole situation. And then when they came up with that idea, they went with Shelmet and cut this. So there's also a cool and a bit of a tragic story behind this design too, which I always think makes the Pokemon all the more interesting when they have a story to go with them as well. So overall, these guys are cool. Then also from Gen 5, we have this small little bubble mouse looking thing. I don't really know what this is. It kind of feels like maybe it could have been a Pikachu clone or like a Meryl type of Pokemon at some point. Has that kind of endearment to it, looks really cool. So yeah, I genuinely don't have any bad things to say about it, but there are other Pokemon that I also like a lot more on this list. Like, for instance, all of the evolutions and pre-evolutions to Pokemon that actually made the final games. We've got a bunch of them here, so I'm just gonna start listing them off. We've got Manectric having an evolution, which is insane. We've got this original Claydol pre-evolution. We've got this original Carablast evolution, which I believe is before, once again, the whole Shelmet, Acelgor, Escavalier situation was solidified. We've also got Vibrava originally having a different first stage. We've got a Relicanth pre-evolution, which who would have guessed a Relicanth pre-evolution would have existed. We've also got a Tropius pre-evolution, which is insane, and we've got a Spinda evolution, and Spinda evolution, did you hear that before I move on to the next one? There was going to be a Spinda evolution and a Makuhita pre-evolution, which is also crazy. Obviously, it's insane and just super fascinating to learn that all these Pokemon once had different evolutions or pre-evolutions that got cut, and I'm not going to attempt to place all of them, I guess, one after the other or whatever, but I just kind of lumped these guys together because it's just super fascinating to learn about cut evolutions or cut pre-evolutions, but I would have to say that I think some of the ones like the Tropius pre-evolution or the Spinda evolution are probably the coolest, because we've wanted Tropius to have a pre-evolution forever, or an evolution or something, and apparently it was going to get that, and then Spinda you never would have thought would have had an evolution, but it apparently did. And then also this guy was the other half of that original Zangoose Seviper concept that I talked about earlier with this Pokemon. So to have, once again, that kind of story to these guys just makes them all the more fascinating. And for my last little intrusion of the video, we also have this cut Vulpix pre-evolution, which leaked a little after recording this video, and this design actually got cut 2 other times before this too, because we learned previously that they were also going to do a baby Vulpix in Gen 1 and Gen 2. So apparently they thought about bringing it back again, only to cut it again, which is pretty sad. And also a bit confusing, because Vulpix doesn't really need a pre-evolution. It's already kinda small and cute enough on its own, which makes it all the weirder that they tried it 3 different times. They must have really liked this Pokemon. But I will say that this particular design of it does look pretty nice, so I figured I could rank it up here with all of the other evolutions and pre-evolutions. And now everything past this is going to be really, really good, because if you're better than cut evolutions and pre-evolutions, you've got something going for you. And the first of these kinds of Pokemon is this guy. Now, once again, I want to touch on this a little more in detail in a future video, so I won't say too much here, but this is basically here because, as you might be able to tell, this is very likely a very early version of Torchic. But it's also a Pokemon that at this stage was very insect-like and was likely literally a bug type. So to basically be able to say that Torchic more than likely started as a bug type Pokemon in terms of its design and what it looks like is mind-blowing, and it's the kind of thing that I love beta leaks for, because you get to learn super interesting stuff that you never would have guessed about all of these different Pokemon, so this one is cool. And now we're beginning to get into the really heavy hitters, because we've now got this Chameleon Pokemon and its evolution, which come from the leaks of some beta X and Y material, so we're now getting into Gen 6, and this is only the beginning of that kind of stuff. If you've already seen it, you know what I'm talking about, but this is an awesome design, and it's literally, in my opinion, the worst of the bunch from these Beta X and Y mons, because there are absolutely some phenomenal designs that got cut here. But breaking that up for just a bit is this little guy, who apparently comes from Gen 5 and is known as Gorokin. And I don't really know what this guy would have been used for. I don't think we know at this point in general, but he just has a really interesting, unique look to him that I think just looks really, really cool. Back to Gen 6 though, and now we have these 2 Skull Bird Pokemon. And what else do I need to say except these look freaking phenomenal. They do remind me a little bit of Volibey and Mandibuzz, so I wonder if maybe that had a factor in why they didn't make the final games, but otherwise, like, why would you cut these? And, like, honestly, just retroactively cut Mandibuzz and Volibey and put these guys in instead. I don't think anyone would mind, because they're just that cool. We are now officially in the top 10, and beginning the top 10 is this Flamingo Pokemon that was cut from X and Y. And this thing, I don't need to tell you, is a travesty that it got cut, because this looks incredible and is honestly, in my personal opinion, what we should have got out of a Flamingo Pokemon instead of Flamigo, which is just a flamingo. At number 9, we have this really interesting looking fish Pokemon, and I honestly am not even quite sure what it's supposed to be, so I won't say definitively one way or another, because that would just be speculation on my part, but I love the way, I just love how unique and interesting and original it looks. Like, it has got that kind of design down pat, and those are some of my personal favorite Pokemon designs, when they just look really interesting and unique and original. At numbers 8 and 7, we have these two diving beetle Pokemon, and I think you're starting to see why these guys are at the top of the list, because these are next level. Like, this is a beta Pokemon, and if this was just taken straight from this concept art and put into the game, it would be an S tier Pokemon with no changes required whatsoever. This guy is genuinely fantastic, and I'm genuinely distraught that they thought they had any kind of reason that warranted cutting this guy. It's not just these Generation 6 mons that are taking up the top spots though, because at number 6 we also have this Pokemon that was supposed to be in Generation 5, and I don't know whether he's supposed to be some kind of turtle or dinosaur or what the heck he's supposed to be, but he looks freaking cool, and that's sometimes all you really need. So this guy, again, absolute shame that it was cut. It looks freaking incredible, and especially in Gen 5, I feel like it would have been a fantastic addition to the Unova Dex. Now we're getting really serious though, because now we're into the top 5, and at number 5, we have the Evolution Lottery Pokemon. Now, if you're not tuned in or haven't been caught up with all of the leaks and everything that's been going on, it is speculated based on this guy's information and what we know about him that his gimmick that he was going to have was potentially the ability to randomly evolve into any Pokemon, because his design and his name and everything else is centered around evolution and lottery. So it seems like his evolution was going to be a lottery, and you could have potentially got a random evolution upon evolving this guy, which is kind of a broken concept, but is also an insanely, immensely cool concept at the same time that would be worth it even if it was broken. So it sucks that this guy didn't get the chance to actually appear in the games. However, for as cool as that is, it's only number 5 for me, because at number 4, we have Warabbit. I believe that's its official name, but this water rabbit starter, absolute adorable bean of a Pokemon. Yes, according to concept art, this guy was going to be the water starter that we were going to have in Pokemon Ruby and Sapphire before we got Mudkip. And I'm glad we got Mudkip, because in my opinion, it's one of the best starters out there, period. But it's just so cool to know. Just to know of any starter Pokemon that was cut, that was gonna be there originally, but then got scrapped. Like, cut Pokemon are one thing, but then when you get to learn about cut starter Pokemon, it's just a whole new level of coolness. And this guy actually has a super cool design with the way he wraps his tail around his waist to look like an inner tube. So there's actual like big brain design elements going on here, and it's just overall amazing. So I'm absolutely stoked that we got the chance to learn about this guy, and he's definitely one of the coolest cut Pokemon out there. We are now into the top 3 though, and this is where we actually really start getting into my personal favorites. And at number 3, we have the Bowling Pin Penguin Pokemon. Now, at first glance, this guy doesn't look like much, but when you dig into the details, that's where he really starts to become amazing, because this is a penguin Pokemon, and as you can kind of see if you look closely at it, it's meant to be in the shape of a bowling pin. I almost said ball. It's meant to be in the shape of a bowling pin, and it's even got that stripe around its neck just like bowling pins do. There was also going to be a bowling ball Pokemon, meanwhile, to go with this bowling pin, and that Pokemon was none other than Spheal. That is the reason why Spheal is such a round, adorable, just beautiful looking Pokemon, because it was originally going to be a bowling ball, and the reason why is because it is a seal, and so as a seal bowling ball, it would have gone after the bowling pin penguin Pokemon, because seals hunt penguins in real life. So it's just a genius, just so creative concept that I absolutely adore. And then it also just works on so many levels, because if you think about it, penguins often walk together and live together in big flocks, which works perfectly with the concept of bowling pins that are all set up in a group as well. So this design, even though it looks so simple, works on like a billion different levels, and it's the kind of design that I love Pokemon for. So yeah, Bowling Pin Penguin is number 3. And then number 2 and number 1 are kind of a package deal, because it's an evolution and a pre-evolution, but it's none other than this Peanut Pokemon and its evolution from the Pokemon X and Y concept art. So this guy was cut from Pokemon X and Y. And are you kidding me? Like, it's just the same kinds of stuff I was talking about with the penguin Pokemon. Like, this guy is a peanut dinosaur. You would never ever think to really put those two together, but when you see them together and then in the form of a Pokemon, it's just so geniusly creative, I can't even begin to wrap my head around it. And then when you actually look at what a peanut plant, someone did this on Twitter, shout out to whoever pointed it out first, because it wasn't me, but basically this peanut dinosaur in particular perfectly resembles what an actual peanut plant looks like, including its roots and the flower and everything else. And it's just like a one-to-one recreation of the plant, but then they seamlessly made it into a dinosaur. Like, that is so cool to me. And I just love also how it has a beautiful combination of cute and cool. So it's got endearingness to it, but then it's also the kind of Pokemon that could be tough and cool at the same time. It's just all of that wrapped up into one, and in my opinion, it is Pokemon design genius. Like, this guy is not only my favorite of this group of cut Pokemon, it's my favorite cut Pokemon, period. It's absolutely amazing, but then again, that is just my list. So now that I've covered my rankings, I want to hear your rankings in the comments below. Let me know your favorites. Let me know your thoughts on all of these cut Pokemon. And if you enjoyed, be sure to leave a like, subscribe if you haven't already, because that would be super appreciated. And thank you so much for watching. I'll be back with another new video very soon as well. So be sure to stay tuned for that and subscribe once again if you haven't already. And until then, as always, thanks again for watching, and I will smell you guys later.